Hello, good evening, and welcome to our latest live stream. I'm sorry for some reason we couldn't hear the song there. We normally have I'm free or whatever it is singing, playing us in, but for some reason we didn't hear the song today. Hopefully you can hear us speaking. That would be a good thing. Do let us know in the chat window if you can't. So I'm joined this evening by Craig. Hi, Craig. How are you doing?
Hi, Duncan. Not too bad.
Jolly
Getting over
good.
paper one, ready for paper two.
Absolutely. So we're going to look at paper two this evening, and obviously we had a lot of requests in the chat window on the last session for the various topics, because obviously paper two is the one where we have the options. And so tonight we're looking at the two most popular options: families and beliefs. Now, if you're watching it and you do families and media, say, at least half of this is going to be going to be useful. So do stay with us. We'll start with families and then move on to beliefs in the second half. We will be doing some sessions considering some of the other options as well. So we haven't forgotten about you if you're if you do culture and identity or beliefs or health and strat or whatever it might be. Yeah. Global, our favourite, but we are looking at families and beliefs this evening, and we've got quite a few activities to do. We'll go through those. Please do join in, but also do just ask us any other questions that you might have about paper two, and we will do our best to answer them. Okay, so we'll get straight on to the PowerPoint and start with our first activity, and I think that's with Craig. It's a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, thank you, Duncan. Okay, for our 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, we're going to get you started today looking at some families. Oh, sorry, something's just happened to my screen. Going to get started looking at some families and households. What I would like you to do is to identify 5 sociologists associated with families and households, so 5 sociologists from across the specification, 4 demographic trends that you might want to identify, 3 reasons for changes in family structures, 2 ways in which childhood can be socially constructed, and 1 reason for the change in gender roles. So as you can see today, we're going to try and go right across the specification and try and sort of look at some of the broad range of ideas that we've got there. You have 2 minutes to come up with 5 sociologists associated with families and households, 4 demographic trends, 3 reasons for changes in family structure, 2 ways childhood can be socially constructed, and 1 reason for the changes in gender roles. Just type your answers in the chat box, obviously with the number alongside.
5, 4, 3.
At least we got this music.
2, 1.
Yep. This music's working fine. This activity, always see sort of like people typing away furiously as we go through. Just takes a little bit longer to get your first response.
Some
people
talking about paper one.
Questions are questionable.
I suppose questions are questionable.
I think I'm assuming you mean the phrasing of the questions.
Yeah. Well, it's gone now.
Marston coming in.
Yeah, it's gone now, hasn't it? Paper one. So let's focus on paper two. I'm sure you all did well on it. There were some nice questions there. Lots of opportunities to get a lot of your knowledge over.
You've also got to remember this is probably the first time you will have seen exam questions.
Yeah.
And so as a consequence, you may be naturally anxious, but there's still 2 more to go. There's plenty of time.
Thanks for sharing.
Wilmot and Young coming up as well. Duncan and Marston, Wilmot and Young. Oops.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, we've got Anne Oakley coming through as well there as well. That's a good theorist to look at. Let's go straight to it, and let's look at the 5 sociologists associated with families and households that I've
Obviously,
identified.
there are
Of
loads.
course,
We could have done obviously hundreds of them.
There's lots. We could have done lots. What I've done here is almost a little bit of a trend here. I tried to identify one from each of the different theoretical perspectives. We know that on the advanced information, theories of the family, theories of the functions of the family is on our advanced information. I've put Parsons as a functionalist, or other functionalists we may mention, the likes of Murdoch, Fletcher, people like that. Zaretsky for Marxism. You could have also gone for another Marxist, Donzelot, in there as well. Talks about policing the family through social
Engels.
policy. I've gone with Anne Oakley. Engels, of course, yeah, Engels and the promiscuous horde. Oakley, obviously from a feminist viewpoint, lots of feminists that we could discuss in there. Walby, Delphine Leonard, Gershony, lots of different feminists that we'll talk about sort of like across that stuff. I've got for Smart from the Sociology of Personal Life. I was going to say Personology of Social Life then. Sociology of Personal Life perspective. And then I've gone Giddens looking at the ideas of late modernity and sort of like how that has changed our understanding of relationships and how it has changed the family as well. I think Giddens is a big theorist within sociology of families and households, really want to know, and can be used for quite a lot of different answers as well. Let's look at our 4. So 4 demographic trends. These are really useful for sort of like those 10-mark questions where they talk about how demographic trends may have impacted on another part of family life. So increased life expectancy, we could link this into a number of different things. Increased life expectancy, which could have an impact on changing relationships, for example. Increased migration, obviously links into our points on globalization and the family. Declining birth rate, whereas this can also impact on childhood. And declining infant mortality, obviously sort of like the size and structure of the family, and the idea that obviously children are living beyond their first birthday far more now, I should say. So like there's a massive decline in infant mortality over the last 120 years. Let's look at our 3s. So 3 reasons for changes in family structures. Legislation, you could go with things like Divorce Reform Act, or you could go with things like Same-Sex Marriage Civil Partnership Act, adoption, IVF, lots of different things that have changed the structure of families. Changing attitudes obviously links in very much to Giddens, the idea that instead of sort of like having romantic love and a lifelong relationship, we now have confluent love and we have serial monogamy, changing attitudes to our relationships. And the rise of feminism, which is another good reason for the changes in family structures. Women may delay getting married, having children, and be more likely to have to live on their own for a period of time before they get married, and therefore males live alone. It increases the number of lone person households we have. And also things like reconstituted families and lone parents as well, because of the rise of feminism. Our 2s. 2 ways childhood can be socially constructed based on your cultural background, based on your gender. Obviously, we could also talk about sort of like different countries and sort of like how childhood is different. There's not this the westernized notion of childhood as being a time of innocence and protection isn't a global phenomenon. Could also talk about social class background in there as well. And our final, number 1, one reason for changes in gender roles. Well, I've put changes in employment, but you can apply a lot of those other reasons that we've talked about, things like the rise of feminism, it can have an impact on changing gender roles. We can also look at like changing attitudes, legislation, changes in employment being a kind of a big one. So the fact that we have more dual earner families, and therefore the family becomes slightly more equal, although lots of feminists may argue that sort of like it is still not fully equal, and women have things like a dual burden or a triple shift. And that's, I think Yashira talked about Duncan and Marsden, and there's a good example. And obviously Anne Oakley was the dual burden as well.
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay. That's that one. Over to you. New activity.
And then new activity to us, Tug of War, where we're going to think about which is the strongest argument out of a couple of arguments. So you could get a 10 marker on any of the sorts of things that we've already talked about, any of those sorts of issues. One possible 10 marker could be about outline and explain 2 ways that changes in patterns of marriage and divorce have impacted the experience of childhood. That would be a nice outline and explain question, could easily get something like that. And I've suggested 2 here. I've not developed them at the moment. I've just talked about some changes in patterns of marriage and divorce. And I'd like you guys really to you're voting for which one you think's the strongest argument, which is fair enough. You've both gone for B, or two of you, Yoshiro and Sam, have both gone for B. See if anyone else wants to come in with a vote. But I want to do a bit more than that. I want you to do a bit more than that in the chat window. I want you to develop these points, and then we can sort of decide which one is, the strongest argument. So we've got delayed marriage. How might marriage having been delayed have impacted on the experience of childhood? And then how might you argue that an increase in divorce or divorce rates has had an impact on childhood? I think in some ways B is an easier one to do. You could probably come up with more sociologists to talk about. There are potentially more sort of obvious points that you could make, but you might want to think about, the most up-to-date data and have a little think about that as well. We might have a little bit of a evaluation and counter-argument in there too. So I'll give you 30 seconds or so just to try and develop those points. So Yoshiro, divorce affects the child's mental stability. Okay. So there are lots of maladjusted personalities. So why? What is it about divorce that might lead to this? What process or function does the family have that may be undermined by divorce? If we try and keep this nicely sociological.
Yeah, I was going to say it's going into the realms of psychology here.
Yeah. So let's try. So family carries out primary socialization, and so why might divorce have an impact on primary socialization? Okay. Evie said because people are having less children as they're getting married later, therefore families become more child-centered. That's a lovely one for A.
So
okay. So with delayed marriage, if marriages are getting delayed, people are getting married later, therefore they're likely to be having fewer children. It's less time to have children. If they're having fewer children, they may focus more resources and time and love, etc. on those fewer children. Therefore,
nice
leading
chain
to a more
you've got there, Evie.
Child-centered families. That is a nice, clear argument, isn't it? Okay, divorce has increased the amount of lone parent families, often the mother being the parent. Boys don't have a father figure to look to, other role models such as people on the streets. Okay, so that's a really good one. That's you kind of New Right Murray type of argument, isn't it? And you absolutely could develop that. So well done. You've identified sort of the key arguments that you could make, and indeed you could very happily, if that was a question, have these as your 2 paragraphs, develop those, and we're a long way towards a decent answer here. In terms of which is the strongest argument and why, we had 2 votes for B. What do people think? If I say that my vote's for A, there isn't a right answer to this. Incidentally, we could argue it for ages, couldn't we? We could have our own tug of war. What do you think might be my feeling for why an increase in divorce rates might not be the strongest argument? Yeah, you've done a great job between Yoshiro and Sam of arguing it, and it would be absolutely fine to talk about it in your answer. But it would be even better if you could make this little point of a bit of a limitation, if you like, a bit of limitation.
Perhaps link it into other patterns of marriage or patterns of divorce, things like that. Maybe.
Yeah. Let's have a look. So I've made those same arguments I think that you've made there. So in terms of the delayed marriage, absolutely, these families' childhood might have become. Might have been benefited from family becoming more child-centred, the fewer children, and also potentially more financially stable parents if people are having their children later in life, later in their careers. You could also come up with a sort of negative impact on childhood there as well, potentially. As the father of an only child, I hesitate to say this, but potentially, people, might have loneliness or whatever if they've got fewer siblings. I've seen that in answers before now. Now B, absolutely single parent families, that kind of New Right argument and socialization, absolutely that's the argument we make. But are divorce rates actually increasing? The trend is not necessarily towards more divorces. In fact, divorce rates have decreased for the obvious reason that marriage has fewer people are getting married, and therefore fewer people are getting divorced too. I feel Craig's
And also
winding up to say something else on that. So go on.
yeah, I was going to say, so like you consider that in the UK, 40% of marriages now are second marriages. So
Yeah.
that may also then link into sort of like increased divorce and how it might link to sort of like obviously the impact on childhood. So it could be that somebody may be living with a step parent,
Yeah.
or so on, and there are other possible impacts as well. So people
Yeah.
are going through this serial monogamy and divorce. It's quite common for children to have step parents for their mum or dad to have a new partner in contemporary society.
And then you could discuss what impact that might have on childhood as well. So that's an alternative way you could go with the increased divorce rather than the single parent family, the reconstituted family, or talk about both. Sam said people are waiting longer for marriage because they want to make sure they marry the right one. So there's less chance to divorce. So yes, I mean that's another positive potentially of delayed marriage, isn't it? That people are have more stable relationships as well because people haven't sort of rushed into it, and also as you say that then has an impact on divorce. Divorce rates have been decreasing for some time now. I mean, they go up and down. The stats don't show a sort of steady picture, but kind of 90s, late 80s, 90s, divorce rates kind of peaked. And in fact,
peaks about 1993, doesn't it? Peaks about 93, and then falls steadily. A few little peaks again, but generally speaking, it's fallen since the 1990s.
And the last time I looked at it, which I'll admit wasn't for this year's stats, but it showed that the only group that was increasing was same-sex marriages, which again I suppose is sort of logical because marriages was increasing in that group because they hadn't been able to marry before. So, but yeah, that was the stats that we were seeing. Okay, well done though. Some good answers there, and you thought through that well. So, it's the sort of thing you could get a 10 marker on. You make that nice chain thought process. So we talked about change of pattern of marriage, divorce. We've identified one, and get straight onto how it's impacted on childhood. There's a temptation because maybe a lot about divorce to spend ages writing about the changes in the law and etc. But really you want to focus on that impact. Yeah, if you get a question like that. Okay, well done. Gonna go back to Craig now to talk about a potential 20-mark essay with the AI in mind.
That's right, on family social policy. Yeah, it's one of those. It's one of the points that's on the advanced information that looks at sort of like not only looks at functions of family, but also sort of like family social policy. And we're going to look at theoretical views of family social policy here. And I've put forward a kind of debate idea, and we're going to balance this debate. The debate sort of like is looking at the idea that family social policy is necessary and functional. So what you need to do is come up with 2 or 3 arguments that would suggest, yes, we do need to have family social policy. And then after we've done that, we will look at 2 or 3 reasons why we don't need family social policy, or that family social policy is dysfunctional or doesn't serve the needs, particularly of the family. So on one side, we're looking for our 2 ways in which family social policy is necessary and functional. Usually when we see that phrase functional, it brings to mind a certain group of sociologists, and how we would oppose those. So if you have any ideas about sort of like how who would suggest that family social policy is necessary, or who would suggest it is functional. And just to give you a hint, there's one theoretical perspective that might be quite split on this debate. Somewhat.
Quite tricky, isn't it? I think this.
It is. I think it's one of the trickier parts of the specification, but when you actually kind of you nail it down, it does make quite an easy essay to write, if you like.
Yeah.
Once you've nailed down sort of like the different positions.
Because obviously you might get something like evaluate functionalist views of the family or something. You might get like a sort
Which
of
is our dream.
sort of
we're all dream.
straightforward.
We are all keeping our fingers crossed for functions of the family essay, I think.
But you could get something on social policy, and you could get something sort of vaguely to do with economics. But if you do that, then it's really functionalism or Marxism and the family. You don't they would be too frightened about an economics one. But we thought we'd look at social policy.
If we consider which sociological viewpoint might think that social policies are functional, big clue in the question there. I don't know if my chat's frozen.
No, I think possibly
Let's have a look.
Should we have a look at
Let's
the
have
first
a
side?
look.
Yeah, that might help, and then it might help us with the other side.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple of viewpoints that would suggest that the social policy is necessary and functional for the family. Of course, functional. We usually go with our functionalists. Well, functionalists do tend to have quite a strange relationship with social policy. They like it when it reinforces the kind of functions. In a way, sort of like functionalists see social policy almost as a right. Okay, this is how we fix what's broken. But they do tend to see society as functioning adequately on its own. But they would say that policy is necessary to reinforce those functions of the family. So where functionalists might suggest that that policy is necessary is reinforcing the idea of a nuclear family. So, for example, things like tax allowances for married couples, or anything that will reinforce, making divorce harder, might be a functionalist view. Okay,
And could link with the new right view as well. Although I'm. Yeah,
it could do,
but you may bring that in somewhere else. But they might feel
again.
that way too.
Likewise, the new like functionalists, the new rights have a very strange relationship with social policy, don't they? Really, they don't really like it, but at the same time, they use it. So liberal feminists, they would sort of like suggest that social policy, particularly social policy that tackles gender inequality, is a necessary tool for creating the positive changes in the family. So they would look at some of the changes, particularly those that happened, kind of progressive policies of the late 1960s. So the availability of contraception on prescription, and the abortion, the legalization of abortion would be seen as a progressive policy, sort of like that allowed women to have control over their reproductive rights. Divorce reform, they would be kind of very much in favour of divorce reform. And then you can look at other policies that didn't directly impact on the family, but had an indirect impact. So employment legislation, the Equality Act in 2010. So liberal feminists do look to use policy. So they've got a very positive view of policy. This might give you an idea now as to who might not think policy is functional or necessary, particularly when it comes to the family.
So any thoughts on the other side of the argument before we reveal on the scale?
So our functionists and liberal feminists think one thing, the other side. Dependency culture, good one. That's a good shout. New right undermines the traditional nuclear family, particularly permissive policies that we've mentioned that liberal feminists would support. Yeah, the new right certainly would see that as undermining the traditional nuclear family.
I mean, that is one of the problems we talk about social policy as a broad thing, isn't it? Because obviously there are policies that the new right would hate and do, certainly, such as divorce rate and things. But things like child support and, perhaps tax
child support
cuts.
Agency or child support.
Yeah, and child support agency, and also, the child support agency, not child support. Yeah, I'll be clear. Sorry, the child support agency, as it was brought in under the Thatcher government. Also, things like, maybe tax cuts to encourage nuclear families and that sort of thing would
married person's tax allowance.
Married person's tax allowance. Yeah.
They reintroduced that, didn't they?
Yeah, Flo's also.
We have got lone parent mothers depend on it for the benefits. So the
welfare
welfare dependency. Yeah. Let's look at my disadvantages because they're very similar to what you put there. So I did mention the new right and welfare dependency that would suggest that sort of like not only does it create lone parent families, but also sort of like people then are not motivated to work and therefore families become dependent upon the state to provide support, and therefore the family is not performing its functions according to the new right, of course. So some really good points there. So like if you were going to do an essay on social policy, you would certainly include new right in being critical of some social policies. But as Duncan rightly put out, and this might be a point that you put in your essay, they do use social policies to try and reinforce traditional elements of the nuclear family. Yashiro said that as well. The other view, conflict views, and by conflict views, I mean, I would say here like Marxism and more radical feminism. The idea that most social policy is based upon ideology. So you have the Marxist Don Zalotti talked about social policy polices the family, and it kind of limits the family. You could use an example of something such as the two-child cap on benefits in the UK. That can be seen as a way in which we police the family, we stop them from reproducing. And with obviously with radical feminists, they would sort of like look at the way in which certain benefits used to be paid to mothers, which reinforced. I'm talking about not child maintenance, family allowance. What's it called now? Child benefit.
Child benefit.
Yeah, and child benefit sort of like reinforces this idea that women are. That women are the primary caregiver, and also how benefits used to be paid to one person in the household, which has re-emerged with universal credit because what happens is then it reinforces the idea that the male has power over money as well, so it can have negative impacts for women.
I mean, even
Okay,
social
so
policy.
that kind of sums up.
Yeah, I was going to say, even social policies that are almost universally seen as being positive, like something like the Sure Start, some conflict theorists would see that as being controlling and judging working class mothers, etc. So would fit in with that kind of Don Zalot type approach. So it's that's quite an interesting area to consider, that sort of surveillance of the family through policy.
Yeah, generally speaking, if it's provided by the state, Marxists are going to be suspicious of it, quite simply. Or your traditional Marxists certainly are going to be very suspicious of sort of things that are provided by the state. They will always see it as having an ulterior motive.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to our next activity then.
Yep.
Yes,
okay, so we've got the connection spinner, which is something we can use for thinking about those outline and explain type questions where we've got something from one bit of the spec and we're linking it to another. So if I show you what I mean, we've got globalization here. It's a classic for an outline and explain question. Outline and explain two ways in which globalization may. We've moved on to beliefs now, by the way, so if you're a media or global development or stratification person, I apologise for having lost you, but the skills we're talking about are still relevant, so you may want to stay with us, but I don't want to confuse you. So you might get a question like, outline and explain two ways in which globalisation has impacted on gender differences in religiosity, or has impacted on the growth of new religious movements, or has impacted on social class differences in religiosity, or has led to science replacing religion as the dominant belief system, or has impacted on changing functions of religion in society, or has led to a decline in church attendance. It's unlikely to be the science one because we know the essay is more likely to be in that sort of territory, but it's not impossible. So we're going to spin the wheel. We're going to get two of these. Don't worry, we're not going to do more than two of them. But we're going to generate two possible outline and explain questions, both as it happens relating to globalisation. They don't have to, of course. It could be anything, but it will be one from one bit of the spec applying to another bit of the spec, of the belief spec. Okay, so here we go. Let's spin. Outline explain two ways that globalisation may have led to a decline in church attendance. Okay, that's quite an interesting one because we tend not necessarily to link globalisation with our secularisation type stuff for all sorts of interesting reasons, because secularisation we link with kind of modernity, globalisation we might link more with post-modernity. There are lots of other things we talk about in terms of globalisation. Lots of things that we might use as counter-arguments to secularisation sometimes. But can we think about two ways in which globalisation could have led to a decline in church attendance, to fewer people going to church? I think you will have stuff on the tip of your tongue. In some ways, this would be quite a nice question, wouldn't it? Because although they're from different spec points, there are things you learn directly when we talk about secularisation that link to.
Yeah.
Decline.
I think it's always useful. Oh, there you go, Yashira. I was just about to give you a hint. I like that, Yashira.
Already got it there.
and
yeah.
Rihanna.
Yeah, so online,
same
online religion online, absolutely. Electronic church, believing without belonging, got Davey. Yes, more religious plurality due to globalisation. So fewer people attend church. Let's do a bit of analysis here, Zainab. So let's make the link between those two. You're absolutely right. So greater religious plurality might lead to fewer people attending church, but why? Let's just link the two together.
Oh.
What is it about there being more religions, people being aware of more religions, that might lead to fewer people attending church? Is it just that they're attending different religious institutions, or might it mean that people start attending no religious institutions at all? Might encourage secularization. How might that do? Why might religious pluralism lead to that? It's an interesting concept, isn't there? Craig's in demand this evening.
Sorry, I thought I actually just put it on mute and I didn't press the mute button, so it's just kind of going off.
So there's an interesting concept there, isn't there, about, if there are loads of religions, if we are aware of loads of religions, religion no longer has something that it perhaps used to do, and that might lead to people thinking, I'm not going to do it. People are leaving conventional religions, I'm saying, so no longer attend church, people attend to other belief systems. Yeah, so you could make that argument, and so different, like kind of new religious movements, people are sort of might be attracted to different belief systems that they've learnt about from other countries. You could link that to globalization nicely. They could also just decide not to believe in any of it, perhaps because of this idea of the monopoly on the truth. If you have in a society where there's basically one dominant religion, and you're brought up to believe in that, then the idea that that's the truth is quite, that's what people are brought up to believe. But if suddenly there are quite a few religions, and you're aware of quite a few religions all saying this is the truth, it leads people to think, well, they can't all be true. I mean, a few of them might be pretty close because some of them are quite similar, but they can't all be true, and that might lead to some people thinking, oh, well, I'm not going to believe in any of them. That plausibility structure.
I was going to say, you can kind of make that link, because globalization we tend to associate with kind of postmodern ideas and postmodern thinking. Of course, postmodern thinking leads us to reject meta-narratives, and as rejection of meta-narratives, we may, as Duncan has just put up on the screen, it may sort of like lead us to, it may cause us to question these ideas that there is a monopoly on the truth, and therefore,
is that by sociologist
Bruce certainly does talk about secularization.
Yeah.
Bruce definitely is involved in secularization.
Yeah, so you can link it to Bruce. So quite a few people talk about this. All the stuff
Sam's
about
the good one.
Yes, I'll come back to the second. I was just saying all that stuff about shared universe of meaning and all that kind of the burger and stuff. It all links to this as well. Could talk about the introduction of science and rational thinking globally. You could, and that would you could link that to it as well. Absolutely. So some good points there, and we'd need two good points, wouldn't we? So one about monopoly of the truth, plausibility structure could be one of your paragraphs. Another one could be people being attracted to other religious or belief spiritual groups, Zainab's point, or indeed Sam's point about science. Lots of things you could go down different routes there.
Just to build on like Sam's point about talking globally, always check the question to see if it's focused on the UK, because obviously there are different levels of secularization and declines in attendance globally. And whilst we see it as being almost a Western European phenomenon, that there is a decline in religiosity, but that's not necessarily the case globally. So it's certainly something to check when you're looking at your questions.
Okay, should we see which other one it lands on? We might have already touched on if it ends up being growth of NRMs, we may have already got there with Zainab's answer earlier. I can't remember what it does go to, but let's see. We could very briefly talk about the others. Oh yeah, sorry, it's totally random which it lands on. Oh, there you go. Who'd have thought it? It's landed on growth of NRMs.
I'm going to ask you what the lottery numbers are tomorrow, Duncan, with that level of prediction.
So Zainab has already said that people are leaving conventional religions and turning to other belief systems. And that could be part of this, couldn't it? So, people are more aware of new religious movements. There are more religions on offer, more beliefs and on offer, and so people can choose them. We can, again, because of globalization, we can link this to lots of nice postmodern concepts. So I'm expecting a few of those to start appearing on the screen, maybe, that relate to how people may react to there being, lots of different religious ideas on offer, potentially.
I always find with these type of 10-mark questions, if you take particularly when it talks about globalization, think about some of the things that globalization has created. So, more choice, more diversity, more, media, more technology, and then kind of develop your response from there.
Yeah, so we've got lots of nice things coming up here now. Leon, spiritual shopping, thanks.
There
Saying
we
have
go.
pick and mix religion, more individualized belief systems. Some, yeah, absolutely, some really good ideas there. So you could definitely go down that sort of route with this, couldn't you?
Yeah, another lie on points that the kind of commodification of religion, so like how it's become how it's entering into secular spaces as
Yeah,
Jesus in Disneyland.
yeah,
Um,
it's been disembedded.
how
Yeah.
it's Yeah, that's it. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, there's some. I mean, we won't spend long on the others, but I mean, you could get something on something like the changing functions as a result of globalization. I think you've already touched on them really, because if there isn't one unifying religion, then that kind of ideological function, that function as a sort of conservative force, maybe is less prevalent. So you could definitely talk about that if you got that sort of a question. Social class or gender differences, that's a bit trickier, but I'm sure you could come up with some. If you think about it, the idea of perhaps, you could think about how globalization
Transmission.
has impacted on those issues, and then link
Think
that
about
to
gender.
religiosity.
I was going to say with gender, so you think about globalization and what globalization has done in terms of
Yeah,
transmitting ideas about gender,
absolutely.
and then make that link.
Yeah. So there's lots you could talk about there. So what do we have? More access to alternative beliefs, pick and mix beliefs. Yeah, definitely went down the same sort of route as you did. Really good. Just thinking
Did
also
you?
about 10 markers. It is me again. Obviously, you'd only be asked about two things, but let's have three. It's always worth having a backup. Apply and analyze this time. We're imagining we've got an item. Imagining what the hooks in that item might be. Reason why people from minority ethnic backgrounds might be more religious, or there might be higher levels of religiosity amongst people from minority ethnic
Coming through
backgrounds.
already.
They're coming through already. Brilliant. You have got 30 seconds to have a think about it. We've got the guitar and bongos out. I've got my bass ready after the bongo break.
Good one from Zainab. That's a good point that you've made there.
Yeah, so we've already got two really good points there. Bruce talks about cultural defence, so that's the idea that new migrants perhaps to a country will suffer racism, experience racism, marginalisation, and may turn to religion as a form of defence against that. There's another term also from Bruce, which also relates to people from minority ethnic backgrounds being more religious, perhaps more likely to join existing religious, perhaps more likely to join existing religious communities. You often end up talking about both of them. Yes, thanks. Then have cultural transition, so people might find it easier to to transition into a new community, a new society if they join an existing sort of religious organisation. Zainab also, and you can link this actually the cultural transition, but it is it is its own distinct point as well. People coming from countries that with higher religiosity, and so they bring those practices when they immigrate. Okay, absolutely, and even second and third generation, the higher religiosity in a country with family there or where have origins can have that impact. That's brilliant. Can we think of anything else? Why else might
maybe think about families?
Could think about families, yeah.
That'd be one.
Or maybe think about perhaps things actually
processes that families do.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, you could think about that one. Also, you could think about some of the teachings of religions that might appeal to people from some minority ethnic backgrounds, potentially. So a few possibilities there. Let's have a look. I think I went with yours actually, pretty much. Cultural defence and cultural transition. They're your kind of go-to ones, and there'll often be a hook that'll lead you nicely to those if you get that sort of a question. Talked there about compensators, and you could do this with ethnicity, class, or gender, but you just obviously you need to adjust it accordingly. But a lot of religious teachings include that kind of compensator if someone is sort of marginalised or exploited, or perhaps if we talk about social class, for example, if people are lower status or lower social class, or we're talking about gender, perhaps people in a patriarchal society are weaker, or if we talk about ethnicity in a structurally racist society, that therefore something like the meek shall inherit the earth. It's easier for it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom than that one. The one I mean. That sort of teaching, can be a source of strength, can be appealing. Yeah. But also,
I always think of really
religiosity.
I was going to think of a really good example of sort of kind of compensators is the growth of the Baptist church movement around about the civil rights, time of the civil rights in the US, and how it helped to organise and all of those. The other one I was mentioning was actually primary socialisation.
Yeah, absolutely,
particularly when you look at the
socialisation.
demographics of different religious backgrounds. So, for example, comparison between Christianity and Islam. Islam has a lot younger demographic in terms of people who go to worship in the UK than Christianity does. Christianity, it's something like the average Christian who goes on a weekly basis to sort of like church is over 50, whereas in Islam it's a lot younger, and that's possibly because of the socialization of the family into religious norms and values and into their religion, and therefore it means that they may be more religious because of the way the family has socialized them.
Another sort of nice terms there is something like cultural amnesia. This idea that perhaps people from a Christian background aren't receiving that primary socialization, and so you get that kind of idea that the next generation don't remember those norms and values that perhaps their grandparents had, but their parents didn't.
Yeah, Bruce talks about the decline of the Sunday school, doesn't he? And sort of like the decline of Sunday school teaching and decline of sort of like socialization, and how more state schools in the UK are becoming more secular. And therefore, that kind of religious socialization doesn't exist as much.
And obviously, a lot of these points link together. So you could pick two of these, but actually talk about more of it, because obviously things like the religious socialization links with the coming from a country with high religiosity. It could link with that. It could link with cultural transition. It could link with cultural defence. So you can develop these points and end up making quite a rich argument, with quite a sort of multifaceted argument, with quite a nice chain of reasoning with some of these things. I'm going to hand back to Craig with a bubble quiz. Is this linking to the ideology and sciencey type bit of the spec? Or?
It is, Duncan. Yeah. So on the advanced information, this is one of the ones that scares people a little bit, is the ideology, science, and beliefs. So we're going to look at some of the kind of the question. We're going to look at some of the features of religion, science, and ideology here. And in a bubble quiz, the number of answers to the question can range from 0 to 4. So it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, or 0. And we'll ask you the questions, and you give as many right answers as you think there are. Okay, so let's have our first question, please. Okay, so which of the following do science and religion have in common? Are they A, both closed systems, B, have paradigms, C, sacred teachings, or D, meta-narratives? Are science and religion closed systems, paradigms, sacred teachings, and meta-narratives? Which of those are correct? Which of those do they have in common?
So if we think about meta-narratives, it's a concept that really comes from postmodernists. So we sort of think, would postmodernists say that they are both meta-narratives? There's perhaps another way of thinking about that. A and D.
Sure, it's gone for A and D.
Zainab's gone for B and D.
For Zainab. Think about science. It's sort of like people are sort of like saying D, okay. Closed systems. Sacred teachings. Could they both have sacred teachings? Depends on your definition of sacred teaching.
It does depend on our definition of sacred, doesn't it? If I were to say, I think evolution's not true,
Would you
or
say
that
that even, would you say evolutionary theory and the ideas of Darwin might be seen as sacred to some scientists?
have they become so? Would it be kind of not quite sacrilegious? What would be the word? Apostolic or something? If I were to say, the Earth's in the centre of the universe,
Yeah.
not the sun.
Yeah, the world is flat.
It would certainly be a
Things like
paradigm.
that, yeah.
Certainly be a paradigm shift.
Definitely would. Let's see our response.
Okay. C and
We went
D.
with C and D. Science is not a closed system, although some will argue it is because of the system of paradigm shifts, and it's sort of like lots of information to reject. But generally speaking, science is an open system. It's open to challenge. It's open to scrutiny. Religion isn't. Right?
Except for those sacred teachings. I mean, there is a conflict there, isn't there? Because if we're saying there are sacred teachings, then there's a certain amount of there's a closed nature of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm seeing sacred teachings, so the teachers that held up as this is the major point. But generally speaking, science, depending on your theoretical position, is an open system. And there are some sort of like Kuhn talks about paradigm shifts and closed systems, isn't it? So would sort of like suggest that. And meta narratives, of course, they are meta narratives that both claim to hold a monopoly on the truth. So I've got a second question. You got a second question?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Okay, which of the following do religion and ideology have in common? Are they A, both based on faith, B, a form of social control, C, closed systems, might give it away, and D, meta-narratives? Ideology and religion.
Again, we can have some debate about some of these, as we did on the last one. There'll be some where we can, not everyone will agree.
And that is, in some ways, that is the
handy.
beauty of sociology, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Because there are different theoretical positions on them.
That's where
Yashira's gone for B, they're both a form of social control.
Yeah, Yashira's also gone A and D.
Zainab's gone for all four.
Yeah, Zainab's gone. Oh yeah, all four.
Yashira's gone A and D. Was that A and D for the first one?
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, actually, yeah, that was the last one. Sorry, yeah. Yeah, B and A, B, C, and D. Yeah, sorry, I'm looking at the last one.
Bit of a change there. Let's reveal it.
Yeah. Well done, Zainab.
Well done, Zainab. You got them all right. Yes, they are both based on faith. The idea of ideology, when we say faith, it's not like obviously a belief in a system. I didn't want to say based on beliefs because obviously that would just cause lots of confusion. But the idea is people believe in an ideology just as they believe in a religion. There's not necessarily empirical evidence to back it up.
Yeah, I think that's the key point, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The key point about the faith is that
closed
idea
systems
that don't have evidence.
Ideology definitely are what we see as being closed systems. They sometimes ideology shifts slightly, but largely they would be a closed system, and they are meta-narratives. They do pretend to hold a monopoly on the truth. They do pretend to sort of like have a one-size-fits-all solution.
And certainly postmodernists would see them as meta-narratives, wouldn't they? They're big stories that try and explain everything.
And how we should reject them if you're a postmodernist. Okay, which of the following sociologists argue that religion is based upon ideology? And this is a potential question that could come up, the idea that religion is based on ideology or religion has ideological control. Which of the different theorists here that were mentioned in Parsons, de Beauvoir, Weber and Marx would suggest that religion is based upon ideology?
And I nearly gave a really big... I nearly gave a really big clue a minute ago, so I won't do that.
B and D. Shear's going B and D.
Sounds good to me.
Always kind of a good bet. When you're talking about ideology, usually conflict theorists or those who sort of like see society as being in conflict will see society being based on some form of ideological control. Let's reveal it.
Same. Yeah, well done both of you.
And they're both right. So obviously, de Beauvoir talks about sort of like patriarchal ideology through religion. Marx talks about the ideological control of the masses sort of like through religion. He did say other things about religion as well, some very minor complementary things, but largely it was the idea of ideological control.
Yeah. The heart in a heartless
world.
Let's
go for. Which of the following sociological viewpoints criticise both science and religion? Is it A, Marxism, B, functionalism, C, postmodernism, D, feminism? Which of those would be critical of science and religion?
In some cases, it might not be all science.
It might not be.
Yeah, but some science.
Yours gone ACD?
Yeah, sounds like A and D.
Zainab's got A and D.
Should we have a look?
Let's reveal it.
A, C, and D. Well done.
Let's go A, C, and D. Marxism, postmodernism, and feminism all tend to. Oh, I thought that phone was off. All tend to have a very critical. All tend to be quite critical of both science and religion. Particularly, postmodernism, obviously from a meta-narrative viewpoint. Marxists and feminists because of the ideology that's transmitted through those. Let's look at question 5. Our final question for today. Which of the following reasons are used to suggest that science has replaced religion? So what? This was a question that was asked back in 2017, I believe. Has science replaced religion in contemporary society? Well, what reasons might we use to suggest that science has replaced religion? Would it be A, globalization, B, methodology, C, increased technology, or D, rationality? By methodology, we mean things like the scientific method.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was quite an interesting question.
This one is A, C, and D.
It was quite an interesting question, that one in 2017. A lot of people basically answered it as a sort of secularization question, but the best answers, did tackle the sort of science element of it head on rather than just sort of think about that just in terms of rationality.
Zainab's gone for them all. Yashira's gone A, C, and D. Let's see our response. Okay, so methodology, increased technology, and rationality we've gone with there. Methodology, sort of the scientific method replacing the kind of faith-based systems. Increased technology, so like how it gives us a greater understanding of the world and of science, and rational thinking as well. Yeah.
You could make a case for globalization that is spread rational thinking and spread the spread of science, but you could equally make the case that globalization had the opposite. Oh, I'll let you do that bit. But yeah, you could equally say.
Well, I had two arguments here. Two arguments that you could sort of like suggest that globalization hasn't led to science replacing religion. Process of secularization begins long before globalization really kicks off, doesn't it? Okay, it's accelerated, but also you've got the other idea that globalization has actually led to an increase in things like fundamentalism. It's led to a spread of religious belief. Particularly if you look at sort of like the migration of, say, Eastern religions into places like Africa and stuff like that. So you can argue the case that sort of globalization hasn't completely.
And also led to a sort of increasing kind of anti-enlightenment, anti-science thinking in that kind of dismissing it as just another meta-narrative, is a feature of globalization potentially as well.
Just to pick up on Zainab's point,
which is basically what Zainab said. Yeah, I'm agreeing with Zainab. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I would sort of suggest that they're both quite dismissive. They may see them as equal value, but they're very dismissive of the idea of meta-narratives and the idea of one single truth.
Yeah. So essentially by saying that religion and science are both meta-narratives and they're both similar, they're being quite critical of both, really, because they're saying that neither are what they claim to be, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. They both say they are the one truth. Well, they can't be the one truth if they're both the one truth, if that makes sense. And therefore, postmodernists would criticise that.
Yeah. We'll give you just a couple of minutes to ask us anything before we close down. It's a bit quieter in here today. I think that probably partly because it's the optional topics, but also we don't know I don't know what exams are on tomorrow and today, and I think people are probably focusing on the next exam rather than one that's a couple of weeks off. But if you've got any questions for us, we are here for a few more minutes just to address them.
If you do look, just to mention, so like if you do look at the schedule, there is one schedule for culture and ID and media. Yeah. In our live stream schedule as well.
You are allowed to ask questions about paper one, Zainab, but it has gone now. So is EBAC a marketisation?
Is EBAC a marketisation policy? Well.
Is that because you included it in your essay, Zainab? Because I don't want to say anything that make you feel like, I shouldn't have said it. You could link it, I think.
I think you could argue that sort of like if you're looking at a particular question, if a school was offering EBAC, it helps improve choice.
Yeah, and so you could. So the fact that there are a range of different qualifications available and that you can choose from them, and the different exam boards are compete against each other with different things. So things like EBAC and IB and like pre-U and all that kind of thing. That is part of marketisation in a sense, because it's a market of qualifications, isn't it? So you could, and it does link with choice. It's quite nice for that question, really. Yoshiro, can you link vicarious religion with religious market theory? Yoshiro, can you link vicarious religion with religious market theory, or how are you going to link it? What is your proposed link? I'm throwing the question back at you, but what's your proposed link there for vicarious religion?
What kind of topic area may you make those links?
So obviously vicarious religion is the idea that people would, basically religious people and vicars and priests and stuff practice religion on people's behalf. So although they might not go to church and things, they're kind of aware that religion is taking place on their behalf. It's part of the believing without belonging kind of thing. So how would you link that with religious market theory? It might be possible, but I can't think of one. I can't think of an immediate link. What happens if you miss? Sorry, we'll come back to religious market theory in a second. What happens don't worry about it. Craig does his Bruce Willis argument.
You can write Elton Mayo or Elton John. The same thing will happen. Bruce Willis or Paul Willis.
Yeah, I mean, but being frivolous, obviously, all knowledge is good, and all knowledge is part of your AO1. But it's much better, you're not going to. It's all positively marked. We know who you mean, and you'll be credited. So no, you won't have marks deducted.
Nobody puts a. I would imagine no. I think generally speaking, sort of like the exam process is they look to give you credit for what you've done rather than take credit away for something that you've done wrong. Yeah. It's always focused on rewarding you for the knowledge and knowledge, understanding, application, analysis, evaluation that you show. They never take marks off you.
And it'll be quite obvious who you mean, really. If you say Elton John, we'll know who you mean. So. No,
you are right. Sort of like the idea of vicarious religion. What Duncan was explaining was is that we have the health. So it's like a spiritual health service. So it's there. Some people use it. Some people are involved in it, but it's there for everyone when they need it. And those people who do attend are the ones who are keeping it going. Yeah. And then other people, when they need it, they pick and choose it. So if you're thinking about the idea that, I don't know, maybe if you use vicarious health system as some kind of consumer thing where people go to it for weddings and for certain ceremonies, then possibly I could see a link between religious market theory. I think I would have to see that I would have to see sort of like a question where you would link that, because there's nothing coming to mind off the top of my head. Looking at the ideas by religious market theory, I'm assuming you mean like Stark and Bainbridge.
Yeah.
And that, yeah.
Yeah.
There's nothing off the top of my head that's coming in.
No, I haven't got an immediate link. Craig's doing a lot of zooming in and out, which is freaking me out slightly.
It's an auto feature. It is for some reason there's an auto feature that centers me in the center of the screen on my laptop, and I've not quite worked out how to switch it off yet.
No. Okay. Anything else, or shall we call it a day there? Because we have been going an hour, which is plenty long enough. I don't know what exams everyone has got the rest of this week, but I wish you every luck with them. We are doing some more sessions. So next week, but it's actually on Tuesday, same time but a different day. There will be a session on culture and identity and media. So if you're doing families and beliefs, you won't join us for that one, but others will. But you can tell your friends, or whatever. And we're gonna, I think, probably on YouTube. Then probably like on the Monday or something, before the exam, we'll do a kind of last minute come and join us and ask us some questions, and we'll do a bit of revision to get easy revision, not too, because it's right before the exam, don't want to freak anyone out, but just like kind of, be there to assist. But we'll probably do that one on YouTube just to maximise who can join in. Okay, I think we're done. So
the only thing I was going to say is it's obviously we've uploaded lots of new activities for the information recently.
Loads of new activities across all the topics
for the different options.
Yeah, across all the topics. So do go and have a look at those.
Every time we upload.
Yeah, and we do put these PowerPoints on as well. Okay, cheerio, guys. We'll see you soon. Bye.